urging us to take action in the House. These are Republican legislators from California on comprehensive immigration reform. I would like to ask unanimous consent to have this letter placed in the record.
Without objection.
This letter outlines components of comprehensive reform that most of us agree need to be included. That is, the opportunity for undocumented residents to earn their way to citizenship. Wisely, the California State Representative legislators, Republicans, wrote, and this is a quote from their letter, there is no policy debate more important to the future of California and of America than passing comprehensive immigration reform. I could not agree more. Mr. Speaker, my colleagues, it is time that we have the opportunity here on the floor of the United States House of Representatives to debate and to finally have a vote on comprehensive immigration reform. Our country, our economy, simply cannot wait any longer. And thank you for the time, my colleagues from California. I yield back the balance.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Capps. Next, I'd like to invite to share a few words with us is Dr. Raul Ruiz, who represents the southern part of California, to express some of his understanding of why comprehensive immigration reform is good for America and good for Americans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, good gentlemen from California, Congressman Cardenas. Immigrants from all over the world have made tremendous contributions to our society and our economy since the birth of our nation. Our immigrant families are an invaluable part of our country. For far too long, Congress has failed to act on a comprehensive plan for immigration reform. I believe that any immigration reform plan must be bipartisan, secure our borders, uphold the immigration laws we already have, protect our workers and businesses, and include a pathway to citizenship for those who work hard and play by the rules. Passing a common-sense, comprehensive immigration reform bill would lead to an economic boon in the Coachella Valley and across the country. Nonpartisan, independent studies have shown that comprehensive immigration reform will reduce the deficit by nearly $850 billion over the next 20 years and reduce our federal debt. It will also increase economic growth and strengthen our economy by expanding our labor force, increasing investment, and increasing overall productivity. And it will provide a significant boost to our tourism and agriculture sectors, two of the top industries in my district in the Coachella Valley, California. In the Coachella Valley, tourism industries will benefit substantially from some of the provisions in the bipartisan Senate bill, like the visa waiver program. Additionally, our U.S. agriculture output and exports will grow once our farmers have access to the stable workforce they need. Comprehensive immigration reform means more jobs and more opportunity for people in my district and across the country, but only if we act. I stand ready to work with both Democrats and Republicans toward a comprehensive immigration system that is rooted in common sense. It is time to put aside the political games and work together in a bipartisan effort to address this critical challenge. Thank you, Congressman Cardenas, for this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman Dr. Ruiz. Before I call up our next congressman from Florida, I'd like to share a story with everyone, Mr. Speaker, about a story of economics and innovation. Cesar Millan was born in 1969 in Culiacan, Sinaloa, Mexico. He grew up working with animals on his grandfather's farm in Sinaloa. Young Millan crossed the border in the U.S. without a visa at the age of 21. He spoke no English and did not know anyone in this country. He first worked in a dog grooming store, working with the most aggressive dogs that nobody else would want to work with. Mr. Millan became a permanent resident in the year 2000. He was focused on rehabilitating especially aggressive dogs and founded the Dog Psychology Center in South Los Angeles, and he held that center there from 2002 to 2009, which in fact was a business. He started a television series, The Dog Whisperer, with Cesar Millan, which was broadcast in more than 80 countries around the world between 2004 and 2012. The show became National Geographic's #1 show during its first season. Starting in January 2013, Cesar Millan has hosted another series, Cesar Millan's Leader of the Pack. Cesar Millan has written 3 books, all of which became New York Times bestsellers. In 2009, Cesar Millan launched Cesar's Way magazine in the United States and Canada, which combines advice from Cesar and articles about his relationships between dogs and humans. It is the #1 selling dog magazine in North America. In 2007, Cesar and Illusion Millan created the Cesar and Illusion Millan Foundation, a not-for-profit to aid and support the rescue, rehabilitation, placement of abused and abandoned dogs. Cesar Millan has also supported other projects including Canine Connection for at-risk teens, Pups on Parole for inmates, and It Gets Better, that supports at-risk LGBT youth as well. I was present in 2009, and it was a proud moment for me and a proud moment for Cesar Millan and his family when he raised his hand, was sworn in as a United States citizen in 2009 in Los Angeles, California. And I can tell you, his efforts and his contributions to this great nation go much further. While watching television, my wife Norma looked at the TV and she said, "You know what, Tony, you need to meet Cesar Millan. He looks like a good man, and he looks like somebody who can help you create good legislation for the city of Los Angeles," when I was on the city council of Los Angeles. So I invited him to my office, and immediately he said he'll be more than happy to help me. And as a result of that one meeting, he helped me create the first spay and neuter program in the largest city in the United States of America, and now it's the model for cities around the country. And it was at his advice and his expertise that allowed me to do that. In addition to that, we were able to start the first. Los Angeles, for over 20 years, had not prosecuted one person for cruelty to animals. And it was Cesar Millan who urged me that we need to put an end to that. And with that, in Los Angeles, I was able to pass an ordinance that created an animal cruelty task force. And today, we've prosecuted over 200 individuals with felony charges for cruelty to animals. Basically what I'm saying is it was an undocumented immigrant who came to this country, who taught me, an American-born citizen, how I can take my craft as an elected official to a level that I had never done before. And it's that kind of example that I believe we have example after example after example in this country, that immigrants who come to this country, documented or undocumented, seize the opportunity of the atmosphere that we've created in this great country, and they are tremendous contributors, not only to our economy, but to good legislation and making our communities a better place. And now I'd like to invite to speak a few words is Congressman Joe Garcia from Florida to share what his perspective on comprehensive immigration reform means to this country and why it's so important to our great nation. Congressman Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Cardenas. Mr. Speaker, I have the great opportunity to come from a community that in large part has been built by immigrants. I am the son of refugees to this great country. And here's what we know. We know that immigrants add to America's way of life. They create more opportunity for all. They make our country better. They make American citizens richer. Here's what we know. We know that in the next 10 years, if we find a pathway for legalization, over $100 billion of additional capital will be added to our country. What we know is in the next 20 years, that will be over $870 billion. In fact, what we know is that they will almost provide $1 trillion of economic growth over the next 20 years. It's important to understand that immigrants bolster our country, make our country better, and they add to it. You know, I I lived in South Florida during very tough times for immigrants. I remember as a young man seeing bumper stickers on the back of cars that said, "With the last immigrant with the last American leaving Miami, please bring the flag." What I know is that the flag still flies high in Miami. It is a leading beacon for work and opportunity in our country because people didn't give up on the dream of our country. They continue to work and they continue to make a difference. And that is exactly what we have to understand, is that immigrants bolster our country. They bolster America's private sector by consuming more goods, more services, providing increased income. All this in turn creates more jobs and greater income for all Americans. What we know is that by 2022, over 820,000 more workers will be created because of the need. $321 billion of increased income for all Americans. The GDP increases by $568 billion if all non-citizens, undocumented and those with legal residents in the country were to be legalized. This is a boon for our country. It creates opportunity. It makes for a better America. You know, I thank the gentleman from Los Angeles for doing this, the gentleman from California for doing this, because, of course, what he's doing is trying to save this country to make it better. You know, there has never been a great country, a great nation in the history of the world that was shedding citizens. In fact, all great countries welcome opportunity. They welcome those who come to provide. We need a comprehensive immigration system, not only because we need more workers, but we need the intellectual capital that they bring. We need that drive, that vigor that they add to our country. And the fight for comprehensive immigration reform is one that makes all Americans better, makes our country richer, and makes opportunity for all the creed and the motto that lives in our country. So, again, I want to thank the gentleman from California for his efforts. I know he's one of many in the House. And what we do know is that if a bill came to this floor, it would have majority support. The Senate passed it, and this House could pass it if the leadership would allow it to get to the floor. More than enough of the members of this chamber understand the benefits of immigration, understand that it is necessary for our country's greatness, and understand that it is what we will do inevitably. Let's do it now. Let's do it right. Let's get it done. Thank you, Mr. Cardenas, and I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Garcia. Really appreciate that perspective and sharing with America, Mr. Speaker, those perspectives. I'd like to share another story of someone that I'm friends with and someone who has a business in my district and also lives in my district. Alonso Arellano was born in 1966 in Tijuana, Mexico. He came to America when he was 10 years old with his mother and stepdad and brother. His family settled in Huntington Park, California, where his father worked in a factory job and his mother sold goods to make some extra money. He had to withdraw from high school in the 10th grade because of the family's economic hardships and began working to help support his family. But he had a passion for learning and was determined to get an education, so he completed high school by taking night classes while working full-time and went on to take courses at junior college and to continue his education. In 1986, he got married, and when he found out his wife was pregnant a couple of years later, he began to reevaluate his life and what he's going to do next for his family. So he joined the United States Air Force in 1988. Where he won the Airman of the Quarter Award 3 times, received a Commendation Medal, and graduated from training with honors. He was granted the permission to take classes at Eastern New Mexico University nearby the base where he was stationed, and he eventually earned a bachelor's degree in physics and a master's degree in mathematics. After the war, Alonso applied for and was granted U.S. citizenship, which opened the door for his future career. When he left the military in 1994, he began training at UCLA to become a radiation medical physicist while working part-time at UCLA at a cancer research center. He currently works as a radiation medical physician at a private hospital. In addition to that, he owns and runs a restaurant called Rocio's Mole de los Dioses, and right now he's planning on opening up another business, creating jobs for Americans, creating jobs in our community, our corner of America. I think it's important for people to understand that immigrants have such an insatiable appetite to appreciate their surroundings, to appreciate their opportunities, just like Alonso, who had to get out of school at the 10th grade, who worked full-time, went to night school to get his education, went on to get a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and now is contributing in a healthcare facility for patients with cancer, who's actually contributing by opening several businesses where he employs American citizens. I want to thank my colleagues for joining me tonight on this floor to share the stories of truth and the stories about how important comprehensive immigration reform is to the economy of America. Once again, 82,000 more jobs if we allow these new Americans to become citizens. $568 billion more growth in GDP to the United States economy if we allow them to become citizens. $75 billion more in revenue to local states and governments if we allow them to become citizens. $321 billion of growth in dollars in the pockets of American families that will be spent throughout our communities in America. As I close, I would like to thank, Mr. Speaker, NALEO, NCLR, and countless other business and chambers, labor, civil rights, religious, and law enforcement organizations, individuals who are continuing to push for the truth, to push Congress to please have comprehensive immigration reform meet the floor of both houses so we can reconcile this, fix our broken immigration system, and put it on the desk of the President of the United States, and we will see an economic boom that this country has not seen for decades. Americans deserve for us to operate in these chambers the way we should, to put aside the partisan bickering, to look at the economic benefit of every community in our country, to do the right thing, to live the spirit of what the United States of America portends to be around the world. We need to start at home and realize that we have 11 million hard-working people in this country who are doing the toughest jobs, changing the diapers of our children, working in the kitchens of every nice, wonderful restaurant in America, people who are working with our grandparents to help them live a better life. Many of those individuals deserve the opportunity to come out of the shadows, and not only come out of the shadows, but to contribute to this great nation with more economics that we need to see. We have an ailing economy, ladies and gentlemen, and with that, Mr. Speaker, we will see growth in America. We will see more Americans go to work if we do the right thing and pass comprehensive immigration reform. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been a wonderful hour of truth and message to the American people, and I hope and pray that in these chambers we have the opportunity to vote for comprehensive immigration reform. I yield back my time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is good to be back here working on this floor of this House. As we have gotten back started, there is a lot of issues, there's a lot of things being debated even here tonight and spoken of from a factor of truth and the things that I believe that the American people sent us here to do. They sent us here to look after the people's house, to do the business of America and make sure that the important interest that they care about, which is their lives and their businesses, their families. Those are the things that we need to be about, and I know from our prospects on the Republican side, that is exactly what we're looking at, to foster jobs and create growth and to do the things that matter. But while I was home over the August work period, I got a lot of questions from longtime friends and also folks that I had not met. We spoke, and over the time frame, we spoke to more groups than I could count. We talked to individuals, whether they be in the Kroger shopping center, whether they be in a coffee shop, whether they were in town hall meetings, or all over. We experienced the 9th District again as we went out and listened to our constituency. And what I had learned about the first few months was a lot of things that they wanted to ask me about. You see, I got questions about the budget. I got questions about taxes. I got questions about how we were going to prevent Obamacare from going into effect. And I'm glad to stand here tonight and say that this Friday we're living up to the promises. We've already worked to repeal parts of this legislation and to put this back on a foundation which the President can no longer just do by executive order whatever he would like, even in contradiction to black letter law. When we look at the issues of Obamacare going forward on Friday on this House floor, we're going to move forward with a continuing resolution to keep this government functioning while at the same time protecting Americans from a bad health care law. Do not let anyone, if you're watching tonight, do not let anyone tell you any different. Republicans want to keep the government functioning and protect Americans at the same time. We can do that. That's why we were sent here. All those things that were asked questions about, from Obamacare to taxes to budget, but also Benghazi and IRS. And a little over a year ago on the floor of this House and all over America, we were horrified at the sights of Benghazi, and to know that this week we're continuing to look in and to find the truth. So not that we look backwards and remember, but that we look forward so that we can put into place things that matter and things that will help those from the 9th District of Georgia and all over the country who want to go into foreign service, who want to serve their country, so that when they go overseas to serve, they will know that if trouble comes, we have their back. Those are the things that the 9th District were talking to me about, and those are the things that this Congress and this Republican majority are putting a priority on. But while I was at home, I was also fortunate enough to get to talk to people who don't have time to focus on inside the Beltway issues. In fact, they really don't look to inside the Beltway to determine how they're going to get up and live each day. In fact, when I go home and visit constituents in hardware stores and pharmacies and small business where regular Americans go on a daily basis, I'm reminded of why my constituents elected me to be here. These are the places populated by the people who don't ask for much from their government. They just pay their taxes. They pay their bills. They get up in the mornings. They send their kids to school, and they go to work, and they come back home in the evenings, and they go to ball games, and they go to their parents' house. They take care of their relatives. They take care of their neighbors. They look after their schools. They look after their communities. And what they want is just a government that leaves them alone, that does what it's supposed to do while they do what they're supposed to do. You see, they don't believe that government is the solution to all problems. In fact, they don't look to Washington for their solution. They look for Washington to do what it was supposed to do as the founders intended, to be a form of limited government, a place that provides a healthy playing field, but it only provides it within the limited confines of the Constitution and what the founders intended this organization and this government to be. When we look at this, they look around, they scratch their head, and they say, when they see Washington not working, when they see it overreaching, when they see it getting into their lives and affecting their businesses and keeping their business from expanding by regulation that continues to tear down the fabric of new business growth through our banking sector and through our manufacturing sector, and removing jobs at the expense of growing government jobs, they want to know, they say, Doug, can Washington be fixed? Fixing the small things sometimes is not real vogue in this town. And when we think about that, and when they ask me the question, can Washington be fixed, I'm able to tell them that we can fix Washington, but it's going to take hard work and a lot of focus, which the people of the 9th District of Georgia know a lot about, and also a lot of our country. In fact, our country is based on hard work and focus, and that's what makes this country great. First of all, we're going to have to start by fixing the small things. They sent us here to Washington to fix it. But we often get so focused on the big-ticket items of the day that we miss out on reforming the small things that are right in front of us, the things that can actually be fixed without a drawn-out partisan fight. And I say so many times, people say, what are you fighting about? And many times it's hard to explain, but there are some things that we can do that we can all agree upon. They're spending categories all over the federal government where billions of dollars are being wasted and not put to good use. In fact, in my time here looking back through the reports from the Government Accountability Office, you see the same programs listed as high risk year after year. We're ignoring billions of dollars in savings by overlooking the small things. I am a big believer that if you do the small things regularly and consistently, they become habit. And we as a government, if we would focus on the small things, if we focused on the things that mattered and the things that we could get agreement on, then the American people would slowly but surely begin to rebuild the trust that they have in this institution. You see, one of the things I want to talk about tonight, I serve on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, and I serve on a subcommittee of the federal workforce, Postal Service, and the Census. Now, I have to admit, when I first was assigned to this subcommittee, I thought to myself, what does this committee do? And why am I on it? And then I began to look into it. And I began to see what it actually works toward and one of the things that is under its jurisdiction, whether it be the federal workforce and the issues involved there, or it's the Postal Service, which affects every American, or the census. Yes, the census. One small thing that we need to spend money on is actually a pretty big thing. It's the decennial census. Using inflation-adjusted dollars, the cost of the census that the government administers every 10 years has risen over 600% since 1970. If you look at this chart right here, you can see since 1970, you can see the growth that has happened in the cost of the census. The census cost just $17 per household in 1970, but it's almost doubled in cost every 10 years to the point that the 2010 census cost $115 for every household in America. Now, I'm going to stop right here for just a second. And I'm sure that maybe if you were tuning in tonight, you're going to say and maybe you would ask if you're watching this on another medium, you're saying, and I'm sure a lot of you are asking right now, why is Doug Collins on the floor talking about the census? I'm here because the census is a great example of how we can start to save taxpayer money by reforming the small things. This government has a spending problem. We spend money on more agencies and bureaus than most Americans can possibly comprehend. All these pieces add up to budget problems that we face today. And if we don't start fixing the small pieces now, how will we ever begin to address the big ones? We spend almost $15 billion on the census in 2010. $15 billion. And if we don't start planning now, some projections indicate we could spend as much as $25 billion in 2020. $25 billion in 2020, a little over 10 years, we're again adding 10, and some estimates say it could go as high as $30 billion. In a subcommittee of Oversight and Government Reform Committee last week, we heard from the new director of the Census Bureau about steps that can be taken to keep these costs from going up. However, the National Academy of Sciences has stated that it is possible that the 2020 census could cost even less than the 2010 version. With the technological developments that have taken place over the last decade, we now have the ability to utilize the Internet and mobile devices in ways that can dramatically cut cost. We know that the younger generation of Americans is the most difficult to obtain responses from when the census is issued. They are mobile, they're busy, and they just have no interest in filling out surveys with a pencil and paper and mailing it back. They are much more comfortable using the Internet than any previous generations. They're digital natives. It comes natural to them. Luckily, we have the ability to utilize the Internet for responses in 2020. We already allow individuals to file their income tax returns online. Implementing an online option for the census is a no-brainer. Instead of sending out multiple mailings and sending an hourly worker to gather the data, the Census Bureau can use a secure online survey. This also cuts down on the time it would take for someone to transcribe a written response into an electronic record. Both of these measures have the potential to cut labor costs and, most importantly, to save taxpayer money. Another way that we can encourage people to take part in the census is through incentives. At a cost of over $100 per household, we need to consider creating incentives to reduce follow-up responses. Improving the initial response rate by just 1% saves $85 million in taxpayer money. Remember, taxpayer money. It's a word thrown around up here in Washington a lot, but let's just make it very simple. Taxpayer money is what's in your wallet right now. That is all that we have to run on unless we're borrowing it or printing it. We need to remember where our money comes from and why it's important to save it. Whether it is through a small targeted incentive or a partnership with a local school or community or something that we have not even thought of yet, beginning these discussions now will prepare us to implement them in time for the 2020 census. This is important because many of you say it's still several years away, but I'm often amazed as when I was pastoring, I used to talk to people all the time who would find themselves in March and April and they could not understand why they were in debt. And I would often hear them make this statement. They made the statement that said that, you know, Christmas and the holidays just snuck up on me this year. And I think to myself, it's the same time every year. How did it sneak up on you? And in 10 years, we do the census every year. Why aren't we putting our thought into it now? And I'm glad to see that our committee is doing that. When we heard from the Census Bureau at a hearing, we also learned that some of the built-in costs of the census come from needing to ask questions requested by congressional committees. We have the power to add questions, but we should also consider using that same power to remove some. Every question asked on the census adds more cost to the process and requires taxpayer funding. I hear from constituents often that the census and the American Community Survey are too long and too intrusive. While we can debate this issue at another time, there is no doubt that we should consider the cost-saving potentials of revisiting these questions asked, because people do not have time to fill out long surveys that they find too intrusive and too over-the-top and too overbearing, accompanied with that famous, if you don't fill it out, you're under a penalty of criminal law. We've got to get back to what really matters, and one of the things is saving money and time. Another area of savings we should be looking into is technology based on mapping software. As anyone who has had a smartphone recently can attest, the mapping technology in a small device is truly remarkable. A significant cost that adds to the census is when surveyors drive their cars through urban and suburban areas and then have to get out and walk to individual houses. Oftentimes they have to deal with traffic depending on the time of day or the part of town that they may be in. As mapping technology is evolving, we now have the ability to maximize the amount of time census employees spend in traffic. We have seen this technology in action in the private sector. You would expect the private sector to know how to save money and earn a profit. That's exactly what they're in business to do. A company like UPS has been able to develop software that optimizes the efficiency of their employees so that they take as few left turns as possible. A driver might make 3 right turns to avoid making a left turn. While this seems counterintuitive, they found that it actually saves money. The employees spend less time sitting in traffic lights and are able to service more households per day. If the census can employ a mobile technology along these same lines, the Bureau has the ability to save taxpayer dollars. Now understand something. None of these cost-saving measures are truly revolutionary. None of them will shock people or cause a partisan divide. I doubt that our offices will be flooded with constituents' calls asking us to adopt them. But simply put, they're all common-sense measures that will save taxpayer money. The ideas have worked in other areas of government and have worked in the private sector. Sometimes it doesn't take a revolutionary idea to be a good one. It often takes a group of leaders deciding to focus on an issue and keep pushing it until the process improves. We have a chance to improve the census and to rein in the cost. As previously stated, we have the ability to save $10 billion in future taxpayer cost. As I said earlier, the big things will always work themselves out. We can even run from crisis to crisis up here, and people will focus on the big things, and we will continue to work on those because they matter. But it's the time we gave some considerations to the small things. When we add the small pieces together, we start to actually reduce the deficit and get this country back on a solid financial ground. This is not a small thing. This is what matters to the people back home. This is what matters when they come up to me in the grocery store and they talk about Washington being broken. They want to know how it affects them at their tables, at their homes, and with their families. When we start focusing on the small things, the big things get in perspective even clearer. And we're up here doing exactly what we're supposed to be. And the Republican majority is focused on limited government, focusing on jobs, and getting America back to work again with a government that does what it's supposed to do and gets out of the way. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for allowing me to speak on this subject tonight, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk 2 privileged reports from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the titles.
Report to accompany House Resolution 351, resolution providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 687 to facilitate the efficient extraction of mineral resources in southeast Arizona by authorizing and directing an exchange of federal and non-federal land and for other purposes, providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 1526 to restore employment and educational opportunities in and improve the economic stability of counties containing National Forest System land, while also reducing Forest Service management costs by ensuring that such counties have a dependable source of revenue from National Forest System land, to provide a temporary extension of the Secure Rural Schools and Community Self-Determination Act of 2000 and for other purposes, providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 3102 to amend the Food and Nutrition Act of 2008 and for other purposes. Report to accompany House Resolution 352, resolution providing for consideration of the joint resolution, House Joint Resolution 59, making continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes, and providing for consideration of motions to suspend the rules.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry, for 30 minutes.
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise this.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this morning I met with a group of Nebraskans, as we do every week. It's called the Nebraska Breakfast. It's about a 70-year tradition that we have here in the Congress, where the House members and the senators get together, and we've been doing that decade after decade. It's a wonderful way to welcome people to Washington, one of the highlights of our week. And what we do as a delegation is talk about the issues of the day and hear from our constituents as well. Well, this morning, Mr. Speaker, I thought it might be important to just review a few basics, some of the terminology, some of the language that we use around here, that we throw around with great ease, is often, I think, disconnected from people out there in the country. Words and phrases like continuing resolutions, the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, sequestration and debt limits. And the reason that I point all this out is there is a convergence of all of these factors right now that is creating the great debate in this moment of drama in the United States Congress. So let's take those one at a time. First of all, with the continuing resolution. What does that mean? Well, each year, if it worked in an ideal fashion, in a proper fashion, the President submits a budget to Congress. Congress can take that budget up or not. The House passes a budget. The Senate passes its own budget. The two are reconciled. We set a budgetary goal. And then the appropriations committees go to work on various aspects of funding the government, whether that's the Defense Department, military services, labor and health and human services, transportation, financial services, agricultural support, and the rest of the so-called appropriations bills. Basically, that sets the fence. The budget sets up a fence, and then the appropriations bills divide up how that money is to be spent each year. Now, that, again, is in an ideal world, which has become very broken of late. When Congress cannot seem to get a budget agreement between the House and Senate, we come to the end of the fiscal year, which ends this September, and we have to figure out a way to fund the government going forward, or else it shuts down. And when the government shuts down, there's the potential for planes not to fly, trains not to run, and veterans not to get their services. It's not a proper way to govern. It's not good for the country to have this uncertainty looming out there, and we want to do everything we can to try to avoid a government shutdown while moving forward on fiscally responsible policies that return us to what we call regular order here and try to get back in place a system of governance that gives some proper planning horizons for the communities at large out there across America and brings it back into an orderly process here. So, if we are not able to pass a budget, the continuing resolution is a vote by both the Senate and the House as to how to move forward either in a temporary fashion or a long-term fashion, based upon what current government policies are. So each year, the frustration here is each year of late, we've been going through all of these difficult decision-making processes, particularly through the appropriations process, about which programs are important, which are necessary public policies to help bring essential services to the American people, and which programs are older, antiquated, no longer effective, and should either be reduced or eliminated. We've gone through a number of those processes this year, but because of the disagreements between the two bodies, because of the deep philosophical divide in this chamber, we have not been able to find a resolution that gets us to what we call regular order, passing appropriations bills under a budgetary framework. So now we are faced with a continuing resolution, the decision as to how to fund the government moving forward, either for a short term, a month or two, maybe a few weeks, even a few days, or a long term. Now, the continuing resolution means that we just pick up government where it is and move it forward, basically spending the same amount of money that we did last year, not getting any of the reforms. So it might come to that, but that's an unfortunate way to govern, and I know it's adding cynicism, Mr. Speaker, in the American people's perspective as they watch this deep philosophical divide play itself out on the House floor and seemingly not being able to get anything constructively decided. Mr. Speaker, I'm from Nebraska. We have a saying, let's get her done. And I think that's what most Americans want. Let's find a constructive way, a proper and balanced way, to appropriately reduce spending in areas that are necessary to do so, perhaps even the right type of tax reform to get this fiscal house in order. Now, why is this important? Well, we have a $600+ billion deficit this year. And year after year, because we've had these deficits, we've piled up debt. There's now $17 trillion of debt, by some measures approximating the size of the output of the entire economy. It's a real red flag. And that's why it is so imperative that this body strive to work together, again in a constructive manner, to figure out the right type of spending and tax policies that deliver essential services, reduce the overspending, increase accountability and effective and smart government and delivery of policy, while also having a fairer and simpler tax code. That should be the objective, and I think it is of most members here. But unfortunately, the system is working very dysfunctionally at the moment, and we are going to be faced with 11th-hour decisions as to how to fund the government in the short term so that it doesn't shut down. That's called the continuing resolution. Now, complicating that this year is the whole debate about the future of health care in America. Now, a couple of years ago, the Affordable Care Act was passed. I did not support it. It's now known as Obamacare. We do need the right type of health care reform in our country, a health care reform that is going to improve health care outcomes while reducing cost. Instead, what we have, and I think, Mr. Speaker, most Americans are beginning to see and realize this now because it's hitting them and it's hurting them. Instead, what we have in the new health care bill is a shift to more unsustainable cost and an erosion of health care liberties. And a significant amount of Americans are experiencing not affordable care, but an escalating cost of their premiums. Now, there's some components of the health care law that I think are reasonable, and as we move forward, we should retain them, such as keeping kids on health insurance up to the age of 26. I supported that policy before the health care bill. Removing caps on health insurance in case a family would cap out. That doesn't save the system any money. The family simply has to go find another job and an insurance provider, creating great duress. That doesn't make sense. Appropriately dealing with the problem of pre-existing conditions. There have been a number of Americans who were priced out of the insurance market, who could not find affordable quality insurance. And that's a real crack in our market system. And so that is necessary that public policy deal with that. But what we've gotten instead is a massive turning over of our entire health care system. It's creating havoc. Prices are going up. People are unsure as to whether or not they can keep their doctor or their health care plan. Some people are experiencing unemployment as companies either don't expand or having to reduce numbers because they want to get under the threshold by which they have to provide health insurance for their employees, and some employees are having reduced hours. This is a very big problem. And then another component of this is that the President and the administration have exempted for certain entities. Recently, the implementation of the business demand that they provide health care has been delayed. And it's really not fair, because individuals are saying, if you can delay the business mandate, the corporate mandate, why not the individual mandate? The fullness of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, is coming into full force very shortly. So this is colliding as well with our budgetary discussion and is creating dramatic dynamics as we end the month here in the fiscal year. The other aspect of this is called sequestration. Now, a couple of years ago, we were in a very similar situation in which we were faced with raising the debt ceiling, and I'll return to that Washington phrase in a moment, or not. And a special committee was set up to review the tax code and to review spending, and they were going to come up with a process by which there was a fair and balanced approach to spending and taxes going forward, but that super committee failed. But the incentive for them to act in a constructive manner was something called sequestration, which is the implementation of automatic budget cuts primarily affecting the defense of our country and what we call non-defense discretionary spending. Now, non-defense discretionary spending is basically everything else the government does other than defense and veterans and retirement and health security programs, basically Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So a third of the entire budget is what is being affected by sequestration, and many members of Congress have seen the furloughs in their district and cutbacks on vital programs. I think there is widespread support, particularly where I come from, on, again, ensuring that we have the right type of spending reductions while there is also a proper delivery of important, essential, smart public policies and services. But we have to do this in a smart manner. The sequestration does it across the board. It's a very clumsy, awkward way to do this. It's not judicious. It's not using discretion. It's not taking the best judgment through our normal processes of considering a budget and appropriation bills and saying, you know what, that program may have been good at one time, but it no longer fits modern needs. Let's get rid of it, and let's either save that money and bring down spending or apply it to something new that's innovative that can really help people. That's what sequestration is doing. That's what it did this year, because that super committee failed to meet its goal. There were automatic budgetary reductions put in place. They will continue unless, again, we can come to an agreement as to how we replace sequestration with a more prudent form of spending reduction that would hopefully be coupled, again, with the right type of tax reform. Now, let me talk about that fourth Washington phrase, those two words, the debt ceiling. Now, we used to never hear much about this. The debt ceiling was something that kind of came and went. You see, Congress has to give the authority to the President to go out and borrow money. And usually that was automatic. But because our debt has gotten so large, so severe, at $17 trillion, most members of Congress are saying this is so severe that it demands creative thinking and bold resolve, or else we will undermine not only our economic well-being, but also our national security. Now, how so? What does $17 trillion of debt mean? Well, Mr. Speaker, we are a people that self-governs. This debt is not sitting out there as somebody else's problem. It's America's problem. So if you divided it all up between every man, woman, and child in this country, every one of us would have to write a check for $53,000 in order to pay off the current debt. Now, that doesn't even consider the projection of debt in the future based upon the way in which current spending programs are constructed. If we take the present value of the future obligations of programs as they are now written, the debt would so accelerate that each person in America right now, if nothing changes, would owe $300,000. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have 5 children. There's 7 of us in the family. Obviously, I can't afford a check to the government for $2.1 million to take care of my share of this obligation, nor can most Americans. Something has to change, and it will take bold resolve and constructive commitment to fair and balanced outcomes both on the spending side as well as the tax code ledger side. If we don't do this, Mr. Speaker, what are the consequences? If we don't deal with this debt successfully, and by the way, it can't be done overnight, it's too big, and that would be too disruptive to do it overnight, but we have to set a pathway in which we are committed to seriously reducing this debt and getting the fiscal house in order, turning this battleship around. The consequences are really threefold if we don't. First of all, it's a form of taxation, future taxation. We're forcing the children of the future to pay for the way in which we're living now. It's fundamentally unjust, unfair. Secondly, this high level of debt, a lot of it is held by foreign countries such as China. And what does that mean? That is a shift of the assets of this country, what we own, into the hands of other people. Now, we get all worried that China is undertaking a military expansion. We've sent a heck of a lot of manufacturing over there. Sent a lot of our economy over there. They make the stuff, we buy the stuff. They have the cash, we run up debt, they buy our debt. It's a very dysfunctional marriage. But the consequences are, over time, that is a shift of what we own in this country into the hands of a place like China. And where does that money go? Well, there's a ruling elite that's doing pretty well there. There's a hybrid communist capitalistic system that doesn't seem to be very interested in the notion of private property rights and human rights. Doesn't seem to be advancing very fast in this regard. So this economic liberalization, you would hope over time, would help bring about a focus on fundamental human rights and human dignity, but it has certainly empowered a wealthy elite, and it's being plowed back into military infrastructure buildup. So our debt is a national security problem, because we hear that the Chinese, for instance, are expanding their navy, expanding their nuclear arsenal. So what is our response? We'll send more ships into the Pacific. Well, Mr. Speaker, there's also a response that needs to be had, and that we need to work diligently and quickly and boldly with clear resolve, ideally in a bipartisan manner, because this is an American problem. This really isn't about politics, Mr. Speaker. This is about principle. This is about participation in the future welfare of our country, regaining our balance, regaining our strength. This should transcend the partisan political divides. Oh, we'll have a big debate about, again, what's the appropriate areas to reduce and what's the right type of tax balance. Fine. But we should all be committed to getting to this goal to quickly reverse this trend, which has severe economic and national security consequences. The third problem with all of this debt is it's potentially inflationary. Now, we have a very expansive liquidity policy going on right now, basically buying up our debt, and the consequences over time could be an further unleashing of inflationary impacts, which is a form of taxation, a regressive form of taxation. It hits the poor the hardest, those who are on fixed income, seniors the hardest. It is grossly unfair. People who are not in a position in life to adjust prices, if you will. And so that creates a further form of taxation on those who are least able to handle it. So this is why, Mr. Speaker, this debt problem is so severe. We're bumping up in the near term against this debt ceiling limit. Now, again, what does that mean? Congress has to give the administration authority to borrow more money. Now, the last time we did this, we actually reduced spending by more than the amount that we borrowed. That was the plan. Again, trying to get to this in a manner that is not disruptive, but actually begins to reduce the spending in a necessary fashion by more than the amount that we continue to borrow. It's a slow walk toward a better situation. We may end up there now, I don't know. But this is one of these dynamics that's sitting out there along with the continuing resolution, the future of health care in this country called Obamacare, the sequestration, dealing with these automatic cuts if we don't figure out a constructive way to budget and to appropriate. And then the debt ceiling, in which we have to have a plan to basically continue to pull down this very, very large, burdensome debt and all of its economic as well as national security consequences. Mr. Speaker, we must do this, and we must do it now. So I would urge all of my colleagues, let's transcend the partisan divide here. We're going to have differences. We all come from districts with particular perspectives. We have different philosophical ideas as to how to approach government. Some people want more investment at the federal level. Those of us who believe in this old principle called subsidiarity, where those closest to a problem or opportunity should be empowered to solve the problem or seize the opportunity, federalism as it used to be known. That has been the robust way in which America gained such economic prowess in the world and was a leader and continues to be a leader for so many people who desire the nature of a system like ours that is rooted in this cultural ideal that each person has inherent dignity and rights and also has responsibility, even responsibility for government. So, Mr. Speaker, we're going to have quite a bit of drama, I'm afraid, in the coming days and weeks. Let's hope it doesn't add cynicism to the deepening cynicism toward our institution. People of America have entrusted us to represent them, to make judgments on their behalf. I think most people in America want something constructive done, something that's fair, that's not done in an emergency 11th hour scenario, that doesn't disrupt economic well-being because it's either too dramatic or too harsh or done at the last minute, that takes a little bit longer view, gets past the politics of the moment, takes a longer view as to what's right and good for America. Mr. Speaker, the people who came behind us, who sacrificed so much to build what we have, don't they deserve our best? Don't they deserve a commitment to these higher ideals? Because our economic well-being is tied to our ability to work constructively and creatively together to get this fiscal house in order, to get it on right track, to appropriately reduce spending while also delivering smart public policies that are effective in helping people across this country, that revitalizes our economic strength, that takes the duress off of communities where people can't find jobs and can't find work, that creates a fairer tax code that's less convoluted, a little bit simpler, where you don't have to have an army of lawyers and accountants to wade through it in order to figure out ways around it. That's what we ought to be focused on. That's what we need to get done. That's what I think our people are demanding from us. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity to share these thoughts with you and my colleagues, and with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The chair will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
Speaker, I move to adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.
Today, members approved a bill that would streamline the permitting process for certain mining operations on federal lands. Still to come this week, a forest management bill, a nutrition bill that changes the food stamp program, and a continuing resolution to keep the federal government funded past the end of the month. Legislative work will continue tomorrow at noon Eastern. And there's been a schedule change. The House was scheduled to be in recess next week, but instead of being off all week, members will return on Wednesday the 25th and work until the government funding bill is completed. As always, live coverage of the House here on C-SPAN.